Mendoza. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the podium Tom Mendoza.
Appreciate that. Thank you. You know, I came here in 2008. It was a very different facility. This is incredible. So to see this is, you guys got to be proud of the school you go to have this kind of facility. Pretty amazing. So I just got in from China on Sunday night, and I'm heading to Miami right after this at 8 o'clock flight. So I apologize if I run out of here at 6:45. I'll try to keep it together till then. So what I thought I'd talk about, I did help start NetApp with a few other guys, and we're about Fortune 300 now. And all four of us are still involved. There's not too many companies where you'll find the people who start a company and stay. Most of us in our business go on to try different things, but for whatever reason, all of us felt that we could build something great here in NetApp and would rather do that. So I thought I'd share with you today is things I think that I've picked up along the way about what it's like to start a company to IPO, things that worked out for us, then talk a little bit about how it feels to go through hypergrowth. We went from 250 million to $1 billion in 2 years, in 1998 to 2000. Then I'll talk about what it is to experience great adversity. When the dot-com bubble blew, 2001, we had just grown at 100%, 500 million to $1 billion. 70% of our business was tech or internet. 70%. In our budget for the next year, we thought that 700 million would go to 1.5 billion. And we budgeted that way. We hired to that. Went to 250, just that piece of the business. So your core business collapses, basically. The whole industry stopped. And today we're about 7 billion. So we overcame that. Currently, we're in the top 10 places to work in 20 countries. We're number one in France. Try doing that as an American company. Just saying, I mean, you know. Number one in China, number one in Japan. We were number one in America in 2009. I've always felt being a great place to work for makes you a great place to work with. You know, when I buy something, I want to buy from someone who believes in what they're doing, they're passionate about it. So that's what we try to do here. So I'd like to tell you kind of how we think that happened to us. So when we started the company, if you ever want to read a great book, if you're going to start a company, one book I'd recommend by the founder of NetApp, one of the three, Dave Hitz. It's called How to Castrate a Bull. Odd title. Dave had a quick story on Dave. 1,600 on his boards when he was 14 years old. He went to a college called Deep Springs, which you have to have an off-the-charts IQ. They accept 23 kids a year in the mountains. He learned how to castrate a bull. His comment in the book is, if you've ever been around a bull's private parts with a blunt instrument, you'll learn how to manage risk. So it actually, I just reread it this weekend. It's one of the best books I've ever seen. If you want to start a company, he talks about what he learned starting as a young, brilliant engineer. His roommate at Princeton, where he ended up graduating very young, was Jeff Bezos. I said to Dave, how many guys were in that room? He said, 3. I said, well, if the other guy's homeless, still the number one earner in the room, you know what I'm saying, between him and Jeff. But he talks about his lessons of what he learned. So when he started NetApp, him and the other 2 guys, the observation he makes, prior to NetApp, he and James Lau, 2 of the founders, actually had a failed startup. They did pen-based computing. I was with them in the early 90s in a storage company, data storage, called Auspex. And they left because they wanted to do their own thing, even though they were early in that company. They did pen-based computing. So as brilliant as they are, and as successful, they're both in the Technology Hall of Fame today, very young, they failed. And he concluded the difference between that and NetApp, he said, if you're going to start a business, make sure you start, if you're going to design a product that you would buy and use. When they did pen-based computing, it wasn't that they were users. It was a big market. Being a big market does not, going somewhere because you think it's a big market means nothing unless you have something unique about it. And if you use the product, so Dave and James were software developers. incredibly smart software developers. And they looked at the computer industry and they said, gee, if you're trying to design software, you have to put your data on some big general purpose computer. What if we took the storage layer and we put a appliance right next, and it's dedicated to just doing I/O. All computers at that time focused on throughput. How much could you go? They said, what if we focused on response time, which means the difference between a big vehicle and a Ferrari. They're both going the same direction. The Ferrari's getting there faster. We're going to make a Ferrari out of this, and it's going to be aimed at software development. That was their business plan. You know, when you have now, it's interesting today because it looks like it just went straight up. But they didn't have everything right. What they believed is that everybody, first of all, it's going to be a very low-end device, very inexpensive. All the big data servers at that time were very, very expensive. And each developer, each company would buy one. That was their business plan. And the original business plan, they would never hire a sales force. 1-800 servers. Just call up and buy it. I mean, how could this go wrong? Well, a couple things. Yes, they made something very, very fast for development. It turns out people didn't want to buy one, and it wasn't individuals, it was companies wanted to buy a bunch. If you really can speed up my development, when you start a company, there's two reasons that people talk to anybody in business. I met with Jeff Immelt, the CEO of GE one time, and he's the one who gave me this quote. He said, the only reason to meet with anyone is either raise the bridge or they lower the water. They make you money or they save you money. That's it. So if you're going to start a business, you got to say to yourself, am I making people money or am I saving people money? If it's not one of those two, you are not going to be a successful business in general. Now, there's social media stuff that I don't understand that's happening. There are things that you can make $19 billion on apparently with 54 employees. But I'm not talking about the extreme case. I'm talking about in general. So when Dave and James took off, they realized they had the wrong business model. They actually have to have an enterprise approach to sell to big companies. That's when I came into the picture. They went out and they said, we got to find a guy who can build out a sales force. My goal when I joined NetApp, or my challenge, was to sell enough fast. When I joined, we were 600 grand in revenue. We were 2 months into a fiscal year where the business plan said we'd do 16 million. And we had 3 salespeople. So as I defined it to the venture capitalists, a going out of business plan being executed beautifully. I mean, they had no shot. In colorful language, I told them they were in trouble. But I normally curse. But anyway, this is being filmed, so I won't. And so TA Associates was our investor, and he said, you need to get in there and sell enough that we can get the right other VC in, that we can go get the right CEO. That's not a path to success in general, by the way. We took off pretty quick because I knew the market. I'd come out of data storage. What was NetApp's value proposition? They were 5 to 10 times faster than any general purpose computer to develop software, meaning when you compiled, it happened 5 to 10 times faster. Now, if you're a chip company, if you're a software development company, if you can get to market that much faster, that is an enormous amount of money. The second thing they could do is it was about 4 times faster than the #1 server, which was Sun Microsystems. So it took 4 Suns versus 1 NetApp to equal the same I/O. So the cost benefit was huge. They just had to get that message to the right people in the right fashion that they would buy it. Now, if you're going to go to the enterprise, what's your problem going to be? You got to have service. You got to have a sales force. If this breaks, what happens? That's why they couldn't take off. Long story short, my job was to go fix that. We did 16 million that first year, which was the toughest thing to do. Making the first year is the toughest thing. And Dan Warmenhoven, the investor was a guy named Don Valentine, most famous venture capitalist ever. Venture capital was his idea. He was the first one. He was chairman of the board of Cisco at the time, but Don was the main investor in Google, Yahoo, eBay, Amazon, Oracle, Cisco, us. So, and then he hired the best CEO, Dan Warmenhoven, who was our CEO for 15 years. He's now chairman of the board. What did we do right? Dave Hitz had a great observation. I just told you, he met the market wrong. Usually if you read the market wrong, you often die. And the reason you die is you don't change. You come in with an idea, get committed to an idea, and you stay with the idea, even if you think it's wrong. Dave says it's not important necessarily, or it's less important that you get it perfect at the beginning than it is if you read the situation differently, you got to change. And you got to do it fast. In a startup, you have very little runway. And we made decisions to change very, very quickly. So we went 16 million to 43 million. Now, Dan Warmanhoven, when he became our CEO, there's a couple things we did extremely right, in my opinion. Number one, I don't know if that's a good term, extremely right, but Dan held 2 offsites that had a monster impact on our future. The first one, he said, it was about what are we going to stand for? What is the culture of this company going to be? Yeah, I don't speak about values. If Dan was here, he'd talk about our values. And the reason I don't speak about values, the worst companies in America, and I've called on a few of them, won't bother naming them now, Computer Associates, but if you meet these people and you go down in their lobby, only kidding if you're watching the Computer Associates people. You know, they asked me to come speak to their CEO a few years ago. They had a lawyer in charge of their culture right there. I thought that was odd. But anyway, she said to me, you can't kill our company. We know we tried. I mean, the CEO went to prison. The number 2 guy went to prison. Number 3. This is 10 years ago. So they want me to come talk about culture. What, you know, seems like a bit odd. But as I was standing in their lobby, they actually they put in a very good CEO and they did turn it. When I was in their lobby, I looked at their values. Their values are the same as ours. They just didn't live them. The moment you don't live whatever you put on a wall, it's irrelevant what you put on the wall after that. So culture to me is what is the behavior that you witness when you walk in an office? That's what we focused on. My last talk here, I talked about culture, and I'm not going to do that today. I'll just say there's 5 things in the culture. I'll give them to you quick, that we focus I set up all the offices for NetApp Worldwide back in 1995, 96. We didn't want a Japanese NetApp, Australian NetApp, British NetApp. We want NetApp in Britain, NetApp in Japan. Meaning there are cultural sensitivities, but there's got to be something when you walk in an office, you know it's the same company. And the 5 things we focused on, number 1 was attitude. Nothing great's been done by people who didn't want to do it. You don't want to be at NetApp, go be where you think there's a better place for you and your family, go do it. You have 100% of control of your attitude. The one thing that separates people in life and in business, your attitude. There is no benefit to a bad one. So I always tell people, that's one thing we're not going to work around. When I spoke for the Marines, Quantico, Virginia, during Fallujah, General Mattis liked to talk. He jumped on the stage. He says, Tom, how do you motivate an unmotivated person? I said, I fire him. Hoo-ah. So, honestly, it's not my problem to motivate an unmotivated person. We hire motivated people and lead them. The second thing is the end of our meeting, Dan said, I want you to answer 3 questions. What did you think of the pace, content, and candor? I thought, what an odd set of questions. The reason he did that, anybody will answer pace and content. Candor's a hard one. 1 to 5, how do you feel? Nobody gave it more than a 3. I gave it a 1. He said, why are you giving it a 1 out of 5? I said, everybody said something different outside the room than they just said inside the room. He goes, I know that. We just started a company. It's not like you're just going to. He said, we have to be candid with each other. So it's something we work at all the time. We got to tell each other the truth at the time it counts. You can't go outside the meeting and then talk about what you should have said in the meeting. Why is candor so important? If you have candor, if you work for me and you think that if you come to me with an idea, I might change the way I'm doing something, you'll think about it when you go home. If you think I don't care one way or the other, you'll go home, get on your bike, and forget about it. Now, that's my problem. For us to scale the company the way we wanted to scale it, we knew we had to have everybody in. Candor is critical. The third one is to create a positive. I wanted to create a culture where people felt respected for what they did and appreciated. So I started saying, catch someone doing something right. So to this day, if anybody in the world sees somebody do something extraordinary to help NetApp, to help society, to help a customer, they send me an email and I call. So I have a number of calls to make on the way to the airport tonight. I got swamped this morning. It's fantastic. The fourth thing we focused on is we got to make sure we recognize leadership. Leadership's much more important than management. Admiral Grace Hopper, female admiral in the 60s. Now think about it. If you were an admiral today as a female, you'd be a pretty impressive person. In the 1960s, Admiral Grace was a legend. She's a computer person. And she was interviewed on 60 Minutes, and they said, Admiral Grace, people say you're a great manager. She said, I take great offense at that. I said, take offense? She said, you manage things, you lead people. Two things on leadership I'll leave you with. Number one is people don't care what you know unless they know that you care. They just don't. You want somebody to follow you, make sure you know they care about you. That you care about them. When I spoke at West Point, I said the best question I was ever asked, end of my West Point, 43 cadets in the room, selected by the 4,400 cadets as the next great generation of leaders at West Point. 1/3 were women. They're all going to Afghanistan within 120 days to lead. Last question. Sir, how many people were at NetApp when you joined NetApp? 32. He said, each of us will have 32 people under us in Afghanistan. That's a unit. Whether they live or die will depend upon the decisions we make. What's your advice for us? Virtualization, cloud computing. No. What I said to him was, you know, I've never been in your shoes. I hope not too many more people are. Can you imagine the difference if you all were going to war in 120 days, how different this conversation might feel? I said, but 32 people, you should know everything about them. Do they come from a broken home? Do they have an education? What are their hopes, dreams, aspirations? They know. And if you take the time to know, they'll know you care about them. I ended it by saying, and it came to me on the spot, it's been quoted at West Point quite a bit. I said, there's only one other thing that will matter. If it's between you coming home alive or them coming home alive, they got to know they're coming home. They waited 6 or 7 seconds. They snapped into a salute, walked out. It's unbelievable. Joe Santa Marita's over there. I see him. Joe was in the back filming it. This is an incredible moment for both of us. The part of the story no one believes is Joe and I got in a car, drove to New York, and neither of us talked for an hour. That's, if you know the two of us, that's unbelievable. The other thing about leadership, what every great leader accomplishes, and I don't care what industry, I don't care what country. Now, they all do it different ways. You can be a verbal leader or a nonverbal leader. What they all accomplish is people come through for you not because they're afraid, not because they're intimidated. They just don't want to let you down. And you earn that. You earn that by going out of your way to make sure you help them at the point of attack. How are you helping them to be successful at their job? I look at leadership as you should view yourself as a captain of a team, not the owner of the franchise. Your job is to be on the field to win. And the last thing we wanted to do was to embrace change. That's critical in a company like ours. And as I'll just take you through our journey, there were so many companies started when we started. There's something like 200 companies started within a 5-year period for storage. We are the only one that's still standing as a public company. When that dot-com bubble blew, we were more exposed than anybody in our industry. 70% of your business just evaporated. And yet we've grown to $7 billion. Sun Microsystems is gone. Silicon Graphics is gone. These are wonderful companies that just could not take it. So I told you, we went through this explosion. Now what are the challenges of hypergrowth? Hypergrowth, something is broken all the time. You cannot afford to fix everything. If you're growing at 250 million to $1 billion, as we did, as an example, and hypergrowth doesn't have to be anywhere near that to feel like hypergrowth. Dave Hitz always says, if you have 20 or 30 people, if we could have a meeting in a conference room, that's about the extent of leadership you can handle just like this. Once it gets to where we're all in different places, we get to meet on phones and email, it becomes much more of a challenge. So the one lesson that we learned is, you do not fix something because it's painful. You fix something because it's going to stop you from growing. In other words, you live with pain. Our IT systems don't talk to each other. Really? I'm not going to stop to worry about that right now. Is it stopping us from growing? No. Okay. So when it really impedes whatever your top goal is, and we're a growth company. So here we are at $1 billion, and the world stops. It just stops. You'd much rather be losing the competition than have your world stop. If you lose the competition, you change your strategy. The whole market froze. Dot-com bubble. People said, I don't know what's happened. You know, when the dot-com bubble was happening, I remember thinking this could be good for NetApp. Oddly enough, it was not. Because there was so many stupid companies during the dot-com, right? Eyeballs and clicks. We never were about eyeballs and clicks. We focused on profit, being profitable the whole time. We've never lost money. From the first time we made a profit, which was less than a year in business, we've never lost money. We were competing with companies who weren't even trying to make money. Eyeballs and clicks. Sounds a little similar to what's going on right now as an aside in social media to me. But Dan Warmanover said, profits are like oxygen. And oxygen is not sufficient for life, not enough. You got to have more. If you don't have oxygen, you're not going to feed the rest of what you need to do. We said we're going to make money no matter what, and we did. Now, when the dot-com bubble blew, we had to make some tough decisions. Up till then, people used to tell me in the 90s, you have a great culture. Our stock had the highest PE ratio on the NASDAQ. 650 was our PE ratio the day of the bubble blew. That means you're going to fall further faster. Our stock went from 152 to 6. Now, how does that affect your culture? As much as you tell people not to watch their stock on the way up, they watch it twice as much on the way down. I mean, there's nothing you can do about it. In life and in business, you find out if you got a friend when you got a problem. All of us have had that situation when you really have a problem, where people you expect to step up don't. People you never thought would do, and your relationship changes forever. And when the dot-com bubble blew, I'll never forget sitting with Dave and James and Dan, two founders and Dan. He said, now we're going to find out if we have a great culture. I'm often asked, why are you guys here and all these other guys are gone? It was perseverance. People did not run. That's when I knew we had a great culture. People stayed. They asked, what could we do to turn this thing? And we turned it. I think what we did right, number one, is we said, okay, given this new reality, we all got on planes, first of all. We visited 80%. We had to do a layoff. Had to do a layoff. We had built a company expecting 100% growth. We shrunk by 20%. I remember when we were voted the #1 company in the U.S. to work for, 2009, they asked me to go on TV. And they ran across the bottom. I could see it. It says, NetApp has never done a layoff. And I said, yes, we have. Later on, the guy said, why would you correct that? Even if you have, why would you say it? I don't think never doing a layoff makes you a great business. If we didn't do a layoff, we'd be gone. If we had, because what? What's your issue? If you have X amount of dollars to spend, if you put it all in headcount and now your revenue dives, you can't innovate anymore because all your money's in a fixed cost. At the end of the day, certainly in a technology company, if you do not innovate, I can tell you how this will end up. I'd put almost any business. Innovation's why companies stay around. You buy it because you see there's new things coming. So we said to ourselves, we're going to have to do this. I'll never forget, Dave Hitz actually had tears come to his eyes. He said, I don't want to do this. I'm like, their families depend upon us making this a big company. Keeping everybody here until we go out of business is not a great business plan. So we announced it on a Tuesday that we were going to do it at 8 o'clock in the morning, and we were done by 1. Now, you can't do that globally. You can't do that in Europe. You got to give them a month notice. There's all kinds of crazy rules in Europe and Asia. What do I mean by crazy? In the UK, you got to give them 30 days, and you can't tell them who is affected. What good is that? We're going to lay 20 people off. We'll be back in a month. To help the employees. You tell me how that helps. But what a lot of companies do wrong when you have a bad decision, a tough decision, is they don't communicate. They do a one-way communication, either an email or speech and leave. We got on planes and saw 80% of our entire workforce between the executive staff in 1 week. Just like this. And they said, tell us what's going on. And we told them exactly what we believed to be true. We told them we had no idea what was going on in the market. We told them we had the wrong size company for the situation we were in. Told them exactly why. What we did is we took a conservative view of what we believed would be the next year's revenue, and we focused the headcount on that. Therefore, we wouldn't have to do this again in 6 months. Long story short, many of the employees wrote us messages about, we treated everyone with respect, so it has nothing to do with them. We gave them packages that are at the upper end of what was being offered, and we helped them in the market. Many of them came back here. Many, many. So not making an action would have killed us. Taking an action where you show respect saved us. And oh, by the way, it strengthened the culture of the company because, what you have to remember if you're going to lay people off, the people who stay are watching how their people are treated. If you treat them with respect, I remember a guy saying, should we walk them to the door or should you have them come back after work? Make it their choice. Why are you telling them how you want? You're just saying we have to take an action. How do you want to be treated? Let's do it that way. So we turned this thing around. And the second thing we said is, okay, where do we think the market's going to go? You know, there's an old saying, when a door closes and a window opens, or a window closes, a door opens. It's one of those two. But the point is, the challenge we had, 70% of our business was tech. When we start a tech company, you sell to innovators first because they're not betting their enterprise on it. Bank of America and all the other big companies, they're not the first guys because they got to roll it out on a global basis. We thought that if we really demonstrated, like today, if you use an iPhone, anything you do is not, anything you do on most of your social devices, iPhones, Blackberries, all that stuff uses NetApp or NetApp type stuff. Back then, it was just being created, right? Well, we thought if you could show people, like Yahoo was our big customer at the time, everything you did on Yahoo, their amount of storage dwarfed the banks. But the banks would be like, we're really conservative here. So they didn't move our way. They didn't. I remember sitting with the CIO of Goldman Sachs, and I'm telling her how we could save us so much money. And she said, you're solving a problem we don't have. We got all the money we want. We're printing money here. Good feeling if you're an investor, right? Well, so when that dot-com bubble blew, they didn't have all the money. All of a sudden they said, whoa, what is this costing us? This storage costs a lot more than we thought because they were throwing everything on expensive storage. And that door opened. So we turned our attention to, we always wanted to go in the enterprise, but now we had no time. So 40% of our sales force was the wrong sales force. They were engineers that could talk to engineers. They had to go do something else. We brought in people who knew how to sell solutions to this market. We had to build out our service organization, which is in North Carolina, by the way. We have over 1,000 people here. It's headquartered here in North Carolina. We got to be a global service. So we changed our whole mindset and we went. Between 2006 and 2011, we grew from $2 billion to $6 billion organically. 5 companies on earth, our size or bigger, grew at our rate or faster during that time. Apple, eBay, Amazon, Google, and Huawei. That's it. So as we look at the going forward situation, what do we know now? Well, why do I think is the number one reason we're here as a Fortune 300 company, $7 billion, as opposed to what could have happened, and that growth. The culture of our company responded extraordinarily well to a bad time. And in 2008 was the second bad time, the financial meltdown. Our number one market is financial services, number 1 or 2. When that happened, we took our leaders to Dallas, Texas, our sales leaders. And once again, a big part of your market froze. And we had a discussion that really changed the way we approached the market going forward. How many of you have ever been to an offsite? If you've ever been in a situation where a company's not growing for whatever reason, and the question is, what else, how do we get out of this? Everybody can tell you how to spend money when you don't have it. If we spent on these 5 things, we could grow fast. Let's start with this. We have less money now. And Tom Georgens, who's now our CEO, who we hired from outside, Dan moved to chairman, I moved to vice chairman so Tom could be CEO, said to me, what do you think we should do in this meeting? I said, we should ask him what we're going to stop doing. So we took 5 projects that in a ascending market, in that growth pattern, made a lot of sense. But if financial services are not going to buy, it's going to freeze, how does that change our investment stream? And we had the sales leaders of the world agree on what the 3 things they would stop, and we stopped them. And we took that money and we bet it all that we could be the engine for what's called virtualization with a company called VMware, who was owned by our main competitor. And we exploded. We won every big bank in New York and in London. We created through engineering a value proposition to the customer. Our competitors said our value proposition is we own these guys. To an end user, that's not a value proposition. And we exploded. So here's my final 3 thoughts on, or a couple thoughts on what I think worked. During all of this times, it struck me one day, it actually was right before the West Point talk, the concept of inspiration really interests me. I don't think many companies think about inspiration. Everybody in this room needs inspiration, but you don't need it all the time. But you all need it. An observation is it's offered the most when it's needed the least. It's offered the least when it's needed the most. Meaning, if you just won something, game's over, and you're the winner, 20 people calling you is not inspiration. If nobody called you, that'd be, kind of bad situation. But after a few calls, you got it. What really matters, so this is something I gave to our leadership. I said, there are people who love NetApp. They're killing themselves for us right now. And we're going through a rough time as a company. Maybe they're going through a rough time in engineering. Maybe we missized the deal. Maybe we put too much pressure on this one group. Tell me who they are and let's call them and say, we know that you're in a tough spot. Is there anything we could do? Thank you for what you're doing. That's the call they never forget. Inspiration is coming to somebody and telling them you care about them when times are tough, not telling them after you won. Last thought I would talk about is this whole concept of change. John Kotter is the most published professor at Harvard, in the Harvard Business Review ever. So we hired John in 2008 as we were starting to ascend. He told us that Southwest Airlines and NetApp were the only 2 who brought him and his group in, the Kotter Associates, when they were starting to win. Most companies, as they're dying, say, could you come in and try and save us, which is very hard to do. John is the leading expert in the world on change. His book, My Iceberg is Melting, we used that in Offsite, was a fantastic book. It's a parable, but it makes you look at change in a very interesting way. John's studies and his research shows that companies and groups that set out to change, you're going to change your life, you're determined to change, 80% fail. 80%, by their own evaluation, when they try to change, can't do it. That's a bad stat. Now, why would that be? Well, John has concluded there's one reason, and he wrote a book about it called A Sense of Urgency. They cannot sustain their sense of urgency. When times are terrible, everybody gets urgent. But as it gets better, like getting in shape, right? You really feel bad. If something really bad happens, you get in shape. Now you feel a little better. Yeah, feel good. Sense of urgency. So, why can't organizations sustain a sense of urgency? And John told, now he's worked with us for 5 years now, and he's done a fabulous job of helping us on this one topic. He has concluded, since he wrote that book, Sense of Urgency, that the main reason people cannot sustain it is they create urgency around a burning platform. If we don't do this, we are going to die, or something really bad will happen. Now, sometimes that's true. And when it is true, got to say it. That is not a sustainable way of keeping urgency. Many companies, that's all they do. They pound and pound and pound about what's going to happen bad to you if something doesn't change. So what would be the alternative to that? Urgency created around the big opportunity. If we sacrifice for this, this could be ours. Why do you work so hard in college? If you do this, that could happen. That's how we have built NetApp. We have focused our company on the big opportunity. Every single time we ran into a big problem. One interesting part of leadership I didn't touch on is you got to explain the why. If you're going to hire an intelligent workforce, and you're going to tell them we're going over that hill, they want to know why. And they want to know if we do. If I sacrifice and I work all these hours, what's on the other side? If you can't paint that picture, you can't lead them. The way to paint that picture is around a big opportunity. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
We have time for one or two questions.
Does anybody have a question they'd like to throw out? Please. I'll repeat it.
How did the founders realize that they were gonna both work together and stay together?
That's an interesting question. How did the founders decide they were going to work together, stay together? So when James Lau, so I talked about Dave Hitz going to Princeton very young. James Lau was an immigrant. His dad was an executive in Hong Kong at an airline. When James was 12, his father moved to America to give him an opportunity. He became a baggage handler at United. So his son would have the opportunity. James and Dave, when James got out of school, he went to a company called Bridge, which got bought by 3Com. And then he went to this company called Auspex, and he hired Dave. So they worked together. They've worked together ever since. So they worked there. Dave always thought he was a great boss. Then they went to this Penn-based computing to try it together. Remember, at the time of Silicon Valley, mid-'90s, early 90s, everybody, it's kind of like now in social media, everybody thought, why not? And then when they started this company, they are still best friends. I'm best friends with these guys. It's a very interesting dynamic. James is very quiet. You know, Dave has this section on public speaking in his book, and it's about me and him learning. Dave's an introvert. And he describes an introvert as someone who, an extrovert gains energy from this. An introvert can do it, but it sucks it out of him. Dave is now a renowned speaker around the world, which is incredible if you saw Dave at the beginning. I think the reason the four of us are still here and stay together, we have an incredible trust for each other, and we have complementary skills. So the three, Dave and James, and Dan Wermanhoven was the youngest vice president in IBM engineering, one of the youngest ever, here in North Carolina, I believe. And I came out of sales. So if you respect that the other person knows stuff you don't know, and you trust them, you can stay together a long time. When Dan first got hired, he had to go to a board meeting, and he had to give the company's forecast. He told me to come up with our 5-year forecast. We hadn't been in business 6 months. And he wanted to know, he goes, so I gave him my forecast. Right before he walks in the board meeting, he goes, Tom, how confident are you in this forecast? I said, Dan, it's based upon people we haven't hired yet, selling to people they haven't met yet. Oh. Then he goes to me, would you do anything different? I said, no. So the reason I've stayed with these guys, I always knew they had my back, and I believe they know I have their back. And we've proven we have complementary skills. Trust is the big deal. Number one thing in life and business is, do I trust you? If you trust somebody, and the number one thing we had to earn as a company, especially if we're going to hold people's data, if something goes wrong, they got to trust we're going to be there. And I think that's why you stay in business with somebody, why you stay in a relationship with somebody. If everything goes to hell in a handbasket, this person's got your back. And we've been through a lot together. One more. Please.
A lot of companies today are buying other companies to get out of trouble.
Yeah.
How do you get them to actually look at what their real challenges are and fix those underlying?
That's interesting. The question was, a lot of companies are buying other companies to get out of trouble. The way I would put that, especially with new management, if you buy somebody else, it buys you a year or two because it's such a mess. They don't want to get rid of you. It's a fact. Because their balance sheet gets so jumbled. Carly Fiorina at Hewlett-Packard, when they bought Compaq, I mean, that bought her probably a year of trying to figure out what was going to happen next. And the question is, how do you get them to focus on the real problem? Now, that's a board of directors' job. And I think a lot of boards don't do their job very well. If you're going to be on a board of directors, the only job for a chairman of the board is to hire and fire the CEO. That's it. If you don't have the right person, you know, one of the famous venture capitalists was asked, how soon should you fire a CEO? He said, the first time it comes to your, first time you think about it. In other words, you have doubts. You should address it in some way. Well, if I'm on a couple boards, I've been on boards that have fortunately worked out well, and the only thing that matters at a board meeting, you don't try to run the company, but you ask hard questions, and you make sure that they're thinking about it correctly. So if you allow a company to run that way, which some do, there are companies that run this way. Let's suck out everything out of this company, but the bottom line will look good for a period of 2 to 3 years, and let's cash out. It just drives me crazy. At the end of the day, I always believe there's a way to run business. Somebody asked me in an interview one time, did you ever think NetApp would be this successful? The answer is no. You kidding me? In 1994, we had this little bitty place in Mountain View, California, but I always believed it would be something we'd be proud of the rest of our lives. You know, when Warren Buffett came to Notre Dame for me and gave a talk, I did a private round with Tiger Woods, and Warren Buffett was my caddy in the year 2000. Different story. We don't have time today. I got lots of stories. But anyway, during the Q&A with the students, this is during Enron and WorldCom and all that stuff, how does someone applying for a job know they're going to go to a company they'll be proud of long term? And I turned to another guy next to me who's from NetApp. I said, and Warren gave a great answer. He talked about his experience with Solomon Brothers. At the end of the day, we want people to know if they come to NetApp, I can't tell you we'll always win. I can't tell you we'll always make the right strategic moves. I mean, this all moves around. It's our job to make sure they're always proud to be here, proud to have been here, be here, and going to be here. You know, that's the golden rule as far as I'm concerned. 10 years from now, I believe we'll be judged long-term for what we give back, not what we take. One of the benefits we give every employee in NetApp gets 1 week vacation to work for any charity they want. So whatever your vacation is, take 1 more week as long as you work for a charity. We don't check it. You just tell us you did it. That's the thing I'm proud of. We're giving back. We just raised $5 million for St. Baldrick's for kids with cancer research in the last 5 years. We're the #1 fundraiser. Completely driven by our employees, nothing to do with a company initiative. Stuff like that. You know, we were the national sponsor for Marines Toys for Tots. That's the kind of stuff that I want to see what we do with the success we have. It's our job to create the success, to give them the opportunity. But long term, I hope when you meet someone from NetApp, they've done something that you think is pretty cool. Thank you. I'm going to have to run to a plane. Take care. Much. I appreciate it. Thank you.